I was a marine biologist who was the head researcher on a mission to the bottom of the Marina Trench that no one has ever heard of. And sometimes I reckon it should stay that way. But I am writing this because I don't have much life left in me. I need to get this off my chest. I need to warn people of what we found down there. I need to let people know what was lost. It has been decades since, and I am the last one left. There were 4 of us who were sent by the government to explore the trench, the deepest part of the ocean. Everyone who was going had to specifically agree, as this mission was extremely dangerous. A submarine that could withstand going that far under the ocean's surface was built for us. This submarine was huge. It needed a lot of living space since we would be at sea for days, documenting what we found. We each had our own purpose on the mission. Mine was to document and research any sort of fish that we encountered. Marie was a botanist, and Julian was a geologist. Quinn's job was just to drive the submarine and to be our handyman. I joined this expedition in hopes of making our names known. I was curious as to what lived down there, if there was life at all. That first night, during the descent, we were gathered in the middle of a common space, hypothesizing about what we were going to find. An entirely new type of plant, Marie exclaimed. Molten rock, maybe? Julian chimed in. What about an entire ecosystem that has somehow been able to survive? I excitedly asked. Oh, wouldn't that be something? Quinn said with a hint of sarcasm. What about an entirely new species? Julian joked. We all laughed at the absurdity of that suggestion. I remember once we had made it down, we cheered. We were one of the very few expeditions that had made it down, and this was a huge first step towards our new discoveries. And this was the dream. The next morning, I was staring out the windows of the submarine for any sign of life. Julian and Marie were bickering at the lab station. They had found an interesting rock with some plant growing on it by the sound of it. It hadn't occurred to me just how dark and eerie the bottom of the ocean would be. It was almost pitch black except for the small lights at the front for Quinn. There was nothing there. I mean, absolutely nothing. That realization made me anxious and gave me a trickle of dread. We were alone at the bottom of the ocean, thousands of feet away from the mainland, staring through the deep abyss that was the trench. We were at the ocean's mercy. I had started to dread that we would find something, as finding nothing was better than a sea monster. I pushed those feelings aside. This was an opportunity of a lifetime, and there were no monsters down here. I saw an ugly, angular fish during the descent down, but that was harmless. We might not even find anything. Maybe, at most, just a plant. The next few days were uneventful. While I was studying a strange fish, or at least what was left of it, that I had recently procured, I remember I called Marie over to my lab because it looked like she could use some entertaining. "Hey, what is it?" Marie asked. "I just wanted to talk. Look at this deep sea fish. It's just a husk," I exclaimed with wonder. "It looks like all of its organs have been sucked out. I was just trying to find where they would have existed, as it was a strange occurrence. Was there something down here that had some sort of feeding habit?" I was intrigued, yet fearful of the answer. She had leaned over in amazement as well, and I could tell that she was thinking the same thing I was. Then, not even seconds after, we were thrown off balance because of something hitting the submarine. "Quinn, what's happening?" I yelled. "Guys, you have to see this." I could sense that he was preoccupied with his fascination with something. The rest of us hurried towards the small control center at the front of the ship. What we were met with was a horrific wonder. At the front of the ship, holding a deep sea fish like a Capri Sun up to its mouth, was a mermaid. Not like the ones in TV or in movies. This creature was hideous. It was gray, with scaly skin covered in scars around visible bones. Its skin was wrapped around its body so tight that we could see every bone in its awful body. It was completely bald, with daggers for teeth, and a face that looked like it tapered. The fingers around the now dead fish were black, long, and bony. It had a fin running from the side of its head down past its waist. It just looked like a larger fish fin. I was looking at it in disgust, amazement, curiosity, and fear. And excitement rolled into one big glob in my chest. I was in disbelief. Had we really discovered an entirely new humanoid species at the bottom of the trench? Were there more? That question was soon answered when our radars picked up extremely high frequencies at the same time that the mermaid swam away. The sight of the mermaid is still burned into my brain. While all of us looked after it, a realization hit me. One that would mean the end of us. we were not alone anymore. We had started tailing the mermaid as we wanted to see what was calling it and where it was going. The mermaid led us to an entire pod of mermaids just like it. They were of all different sizes, and as I examined the group further, it looked like there were some babies with them. The mermaid we saw was one of the smaller ones. It was being called home by its mother. This was a find of a lifetime, an entirely new species. Quinn didn't get too close, lest he scare them off. We followed this mermaid pod for a few days. They seemed aloof to our presence, and it looked like they did not need to eat that much, since they moved pretty slowly. They also never went up for air once, and we could not see any gills, so we knew that they had to have some other way to get oxygen. With how hideous they were, they seemed to be extremely non-violent and not worth the fear that I had felt earlier. Although soon that gravely changed. By the end of the third day, we had gotten so much information by just observing them, but we were still hungry for more. Unfortunately, we could not satiate that hunger because there was another sound on the radar that made the mermaids flee. Except this time, it was much lower, and even we could feel the vibrations through the submarine, rattling through our bodies. This song made a xylophone out of my rib cage. Everyone else thought nothing of it, and Quinn started the journey towards the surface. They started talking about how they could not wait to expose their findings to the government and to the public. I was happy to oblige because I dreaded finding out what was above those mermaids on the food chain. About halfway to the surface, the submarine was violently shaken. I felt like we were in a giant washing machine. I thought we hit a rock, and it looked like my theory was proven when I saw Quinn turning the front of the submarine in a different direction. We all ignored it and continued on. That did not last long, as we heard one of the exit hatches rip open. I was not terribly worried, as luckily there was another door that had to be open in order to actually enter the submarine. Then there was incredible banging on the barrier between us and the ocean. As I started to panic, Julian was preparing to see what happened. We waited in agonizing silence for Julian's return, as the worst possible scenarios were running through my head. Quinn was trying his best to rocket us to the top. Bang, 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 pop. Julian's blood-curdling scream erupted from the far back of the submarine as water came thrashing in. That was the last thing anyone ever heard from him. As the water whisked away his smoking, melted bones, we saw the mermaids. They started to swim toward us, now with menacing snarls, as the submarine started to sink. They were no longer novel, majestic creatures, but ones out for blood. Marie and I ran to the lab to look for anything to fight them with, now knee-deep in ocean water. My blood was making a symphony in my ears, and my heart raced. Marie threw an X-ray machine at two of them, but they still continued to rush in. Quinn, in the control room, put the sub on autopilot and came back to help. One of the mermaids grabbed Marie and threw her against the wall. Others proceeded to pounce on her. I still hear her screams every time I close my eyes. My heart was threatening to burst out of its cage. Quinn and I ran and took shelter in the control room. Holding the door, that low, bone-rattling sound penetrated the submarine. The mermaids quickly disappeared, and I let out a deep breath, not realizing I was holding it in. "Something's wrong," Quinn said urgently. "No one except us has left in the submarine. As weird as it is, they should have just tried to continue and kill us." And he was right. We looked at each other with acute awareness of the situation. They weren't attacking us out of nowhere. They were scared. They were trying to escape, and we were in their way. Escaping from what? I wish I never found out. Quinn went to close the entrance hatch to stop the water. Fortunately, the mermaids figured out that this was not a safe place to be relieved of whatever they were running from. I called for an SOS, explaining that we were in danger. We needed to alert the mainland, get help. I was over being in the ocean. We thought that would be the end. We feel ourselves start to sink, but not like before. This time it felt like we were nearing the edge of an extremely strong whirlpool. How is that possible? We were only 3/4 of the way up, nowhere near the surface. Quinn, rushing in, feeling the same thing, strained against whatever was pulling us down. During the tug of war, this otherworldly monster could be seen in the peripheral of the front window. As I could see it better, my jaw became slack. It was just a giant brown blob. The front half just an open mouth. The size of it was 2 houses lined up next to each other, and another 2 on top of those. It looked slimy and had large bumps and boils that littered its skin. It was using its mouth like a vacuum, sucking in its prey. Immediately, a squirming, struggling mermaid zoomed past the side window. It looked like a worm on a fishing hook, aware that it was in danger, yet still desperate to live. This was what the mermaids were so afraid of. As the greatly reinforced glass of the front window started to crack, fear chilled my skin and raised the hair on the back of my neck. I went to the supply room to try to find air tanks and scuba gear, as we were high enough that water pressure wasn't a concern if we left the submarine. I was gearing up as I heard the sharp shatter of broken glass, water flinging me back, and watched as Quinn clamped onto the edges of the submarine for his life. Since the water was so strong in keeping me back, I could do nothing as I watched him grow unconscious from the lack of air, and eventually swirling back into his grave in the monster's mouth. He was the third person I watched die that day. I struggled to put on my air mask, just in time as I felt the pull of the ravenous monster. My stomach felt like it would be ripped out of the rest of my body. I felt myself starting to go and held on to anything that I could. I did not want to die alone in the middle of the ocean. The monster's will was too strong. My fingers started to slip. One, then two. Now I only had one hand on the bar I was holding on to. 2 fingers left. I was not prepared to die. I slipped into the deep, dark abyss. Something inside me made me strong enough to swim against the monster's wrath, leaving behind the sinking submarine and all of our research with it. It felt too strong to be adrenaline. My muscles ached and my lungs burned as I fought my way to the surface. Somehow, some way, I made it to the top. I took the biggest breath of my life as my head broke the surface. I was greeted by a rope ladder in front of me and the sound of a helicopter. My SOS worked. I giddily climbed up that ladder, incredibly happy to live another day. What happened down there? The pilot shouted as the other person in the helicopter put a towel around me. I was in shock. I did not know how to respond. Something awful was all I could muster. The pilot glanced back, confused. Aren't there more of you? They're gone, I muttered distantly. He turned back and we continued to the mainland. I was still in shock. I lied about what I saw. I lied to my superiors that the others were stupid enough to leave the submarine. I lied that they died of their own free will, as that was better than the truth. I lied that the submarine sank from Marie forgetting to close the escape hatch when she died. I lied about why I abused alcohol. I did it to forget. I lied about cheating on my husband just to feel something else besides guilt. I am writing this to you in an empty house. A house that has lost all of its joy and curiosity of the world. All I feel is guilt. I should have joined their carcasses at the bottom of the ocean. The only thing that gave me solace is that all the research is at the bottom of the ocean where it should stay. Although now, it isn't as comforting. People should know what lies in the abyss. People should rightfully fear it. People should never confront it. So with my last breath, I am warning you. Do not be idiots like us. Do not let your curiosity get the best of you. Sometimes, things are just not meant to be discovered.